I was sharing the forum thread that I put up that I thought maybe we could sort of start discussing and sort of go back to where we left off the last time we were talking, specifically around if there have been any like feedback from the community or like new angles sort of to look at this decision of these two different ways of adding drop tokens to MCD. So I can share my screen again. So Long and Lev, maybe. So both of you in last week's in the last call we did, right? Or Long, you just read through the forum post, but I'd be curious to hear what you sort of think about the two different options you're presenting.
What I kind of think of the options, or like presenting the options?
No, what do you think of the options? We can, if there's interest in going briefly summarizing them, I can do that as well for everyone who doesn't have the background. Should I do that?
Yeah, I'd maybe just go through just what the different ones are. And
so like very briefly summarized, the drop token is a fixed interest collateral backed token. It's sort of continuously compounding interest as long as you hold it, and you can like redeem it from the you can redeem it for DAI from the Tinlake contracts. So in a way, it has an appreciation, right? Whatever the yield is on the token, and it's backed by like a portfolio of loans. And now when we think of this from the asset originator's side, the asset originator has like a maker vault as an opportunity to finance, to use to like sell, like sort of deposit these drop tokens in to get access to DAI, or the alternative is to sell drop token on the market to whoever is interested in buying them. But what the asset originator is doing, or what the Tinlake contracts are doing, they're selling these drop tokens for the face value, exchanging DAI for drop, and then when sort of the investors now in this pool want to get their tokens redeemed, it will then exchange the drop for DAI plus accrued interest. So from Maker's perspective, well, of course, as a sort of a very basic rule, you only want to have, it's only worth it obviously for if the Maker stability fee is lower or equal to the yield of the drop token, to use Maker as a source of capital. But the other question now is if Maker is actually willing to give the same price on drop than what what Tinlake is issuing the token at. So sort of, let's assume we want to, like the asset originator wants to issue a new loan worth $100. What Tinlake does is it creates 100 DAI worth of drop. Those drop are then sold for 100 DAI. The 100 DAI are given to the borrower, and now those 100 drop tokens start accruing interest. Now, if Maker was to say that they would only allow 90 drop to be minted for 100 DAI worth of drop in the vault, then this would necessarily push us into the second approach, where someone else needs to provide additional capital get to the 100 DAI worth of the 100 DAI that can be given to the borrower to create this 100 DAI worth of drop. Does that make sense so far?
Yeah, I think so.
Questions.
Okay,
Yeah.
stuff, yeah.
My first question is, what is, in the primary issuance approach, what is 115% collateralization ratio in the Maker Vault? What does that mean?
So, like so if you look at what a portfolio of loans looks like, we use two tokens to create to represent shares in a pool of loans. We have drop, which is the senior tranche, and tin is a junior tranche. Now, the over collateralization comes from the fact that the senior investors that in this example here have invested $800,000 actually have senior priority, or like first priority, in getting their loans repaid of a portfolio worth 1 million. So in this example, actually, there's an additional 200,000 in the junior tranche that can sort of be counted towards the can be counted towards what the threshold that would make this loan under collateralized, right? Like if this portfolio here would shrink from 1 million to 800,000, then the drop token holders would still see their full return. Only if the loss would go below, then you would start taking losses. And so I call this like the tin adjusted collateralization ratio, which sort of takes this additional buffer into account. And so in this example here, and this is simplified, but we have an asset that, like a loan that is a loan worth $120 that tin token holders, numbers aren't, yeah, it's just an example. But so the point is that like here we're saying tin is taking 20% and drop is taking 100, or tin is taking 20 DAI, drop's taking 100 DAI, which means that this loan worth $120 is used to generate 100 DAI worth of drop tokens. So in this instance, you could sort of say that unless this loan, the actual collateral, not the face value of the drop token, but the value of the loans that are backing this drop token, is over collateralized from the drop token holder's perspective.
Yeah, okay, great, that makes sense. So I just wanted to comment that yeah, I didn't realize that there were these other diagrams and definitions in that document you were sharing, and that explained that explained a lot. Also, maybe it would help a little bit if the numbers were consistent between them, because
yeah,
I think this picture with the blue and the orange gives you a 125% tin adjusted collateral ratio, and then
so what I was saying here, right, is that sorry, this would not be the collateralization ratio, this would be the threshold that Maker would use to liquidate, right? So like in this example, and it should still be 125 here, but in this example, like 115 means that like 115% collateralization ratio means that that right now it's at 125. So of the portfolio here, you can still have a few losses before you hit the liquidation in Maker, right? Like you don't want to have the maximum you don't want to be at the maximum of the collateralization. So like the tin tranche needs to be slightly bigger than the minimum collateralization ratio. So it would so in this example here, this should be 125 to get to, and the collateralization ratio that Maker would require would be slightly less.
Okay, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Just as like not feedback about the substance, but about the presentation, I would say to make this a bit clearer in this diagram would be really good. And so and also maybe an example which explicitly says that like you can take, you know, in those numbers, I think it was 80K of losses or something.
Yeah.
Before you you liquidate, for example.
Yeah. Yeah, so I'll straighten out the numbers. So the difference in here, right, is that if Maker were to not accept the collateralization ratio that we have inside of the Tinlake contracts, but we just look at the face value, meaning the amount of DAI that you get back when you go to the Tinlake contracts and redeem your drop, that this amount needs to be over collateralized. Then you get into this scenario where you need to actually have some third party provide additional capital. And so I think, to me, the question is like, how will that affect the Maker's opportunity to have, first of all, a stable amount of capital in the system? Because now I think if sort of we do it this way, then it's going to be much easier. Like sort of this third party, I would imagine, is sort of something similar to a market maker who would just sort of move money around to whichever source of capital is the cheapest, like immediately creating a lot of competition for Maker, which is very different than if Maker was just to like buy the drop token and sort of offer to compete at the lowest possible price that all investors share. The upside, so there's I think this trade-off between here having additional over collateralization versus here having an opportunity to charge a significantly higher stability fee. And I don't know what, I mean, those numbers, yeah, I'd love to fill in some like real world numbers. I don't know what they will look like, but of course, like if the stability fee here is 7.5% and Compound's offering 5%, then you're going to see this debt moving from Maker to Compound very, very quickly.
Yeah, so I mean, it would still be DAI debt in that case, though, wouldn't it? Right? We're still talking about DAI being used to within the Tinlake contracts, right?
Yeah, it would still be DAI.
Yeah. So, I mean, to some extent, that's kind of what Maker wants, because the flexibility is useful in terms of being able to offer less or more and have that, like, create or destroy DAI supply, right? Obviously, in other ways, it's less good in terms of competition.
Okay.
So, like, that's... sorry, go ahead, Lev.
I just wanted to make another point about just the information that's communicated in these pictures. I think it would be nice to have here a collateralization ratio and then a TIN adjusted collateralization ratio if it was actually mentioned in this diagram, because this 115 isn't really comparable to the 110 in the other one. I think the 110 is like 110 times the TIN adjusted ratio, right? So I think that will also make it clearer that this one is giving you extra buffer.
Yeah.
Sorry. I just had a question. I was wondering what I think it might have been discussed already, and I apologize for not being up to speed. But what was the original? I suppose what's the ideal goal to start with? Is this an opportunity for a more diverse portfolio for DAI generation, or is it a goal to generate yield for like? Does that make sense? So basically, like, what's the original goal beyond like portfolio diversification? If that's already been discussed, if there was something else that I was missing.
I mean, I think you're you're asking a good question, because I don't know what, I mean, portfolio diversification is probably the prime goal. But then, like, you long were saying, well, like, flexibility is sort of the second most, like, is what you prefer over opportunity to make more yield.
Yeah, in terms of makers' goals, it's kind of like, it's kind of a bit up in the air, right? Because the protocol has multiple goals in terms of keeping stable, like DAI stable, increasing DAI supply, and then like making money, right?
Yeah, and I suppose, like, what one does this solve? Like, is it because there's a really easy DAI generation opportunity, or is it more that this yield can help contribute to the DSR? Because that was the part I wasn't understanding. Beyond, so, like, I suppose, is it a yield generation opportunity? Is it DAI generation? What would you guys think, in your judgment? Because real world assets feel really easy to generate, like loads of DAI, right? If you collateralize a building or something like that, then it's, you know, there's 100 million DAI or something.
I mean, I think it was,
what's in it for the maker community. I think that really real world assets is all about scaling DAI, for DAI generation. Just because we've all already realized for many years that you can't scale to a billion DAI, billions of DAI using just collateralizing against crypto assets for a number of reasons. One is that, you know, the total size of that market just isn't big enough. Secondly, you start to get increasingly monetary policy problems, like we've already seen with highly correlated collateral assets and correspondingly correlated credit markets for them. So I think that's really the number one thing at the top of most people's minds here, is really the fact that this can scale in a new direction. So I find that scaling aspect more. Obviously, the yields have to. I think, just as with any collateral type, the goal of the stability fee is to compensate the protocol for the risk, so that the protocol can build up a safety margin and can, you know, have enough value in the MKR token in order to backstop losses, right? So that's really, it's just about compensating for risk, and the goal is to scale.
Yep. No, that's super helpful. Sorry for the sorry to take the time, but thanks so much for the clarification.
I think that's a great point, to be honest. Like, that's one of the things that I think should probably be presented as like part of these options, right? Like saying, well, okay, like this option is better for like DAI generation, this option is better for stability fee generation. Like to talk about those trade-offs, because it's not sort of like consistent for like everyone in Maker, right? Like I would say that's probably right. DAI generation is probably on most people's minds but like that's kind of just a guess, right? Like, and other people potentially have other opinions.
Yeah, and like, if we're looking and thinking, I think that's such a good point. Like, that would be a really good discussion framework to have. If there's, like, let's say the 4 cornerstones are, you know, float opportunity, so growing the float, and then there's going to be obviously opportunity for yield generation, and then diversification. And I suppose where my question was originating was for this last point that I think of, which is liquidity. If you look at sort of the issues that Maker is going through, not issues, but I suppose, like, you know, hurdles as part of this growth. One of the things being like the Black Thursday compensation due to, you know, like, for whatever reason, it feels like the system was okay, but illiquidity, like illiquid functionality, feels detrimental. So less about, hey, is it an accurate price feed as an oracle from an external, you know, entity, like the value of a property, but it's more, can the system function autonomously, confidently, to liquidate CDPs and all that kind of stuff? So I suppose that's my last comment on that, which is, I feel like that's a decent consideration just at this time.
So I wonder, like, we had a few good months of extremely high DSR, right?
Yeah.
And so I wonder how, like, DAI would have done in that market if there wasn't the DSR. I know that I think that the utilization of the DSR was, I don't remember the correct number, but was it right that it was around 30% at the time?
I think it might be more than
yeah.
that, actually. It was
Might
pretty
be
high.
more. So like, at what point will we be in a situation where it's actually not a problem of dye supply anymore? Because, I mean, you could argue that today actually there is too much dye. I mean, there is too much dye supply because like the peg has been going below, or the dye price has been going below the dollar. So I don't know how much of when that will become relevant again, but I think it's not something we should forget.
Oh, I totally agree, because there's two ways to grow the float, or like to increase the dye supply, really. And maybe not today, but I mean, the net outcome is always sort of motivating people to take out dye. And if you look at the market and the way it's going to go, which is it's heading into a bull market. And so a bull market, obviously people don't need leverage as much. You know, if I look at the GBP to Euro FX trading pair, it moves nothing on a daily basis. So people lever up 100 times to get volatility because there's no market volatility. But in a bull run in crypto, there's obviously going to be a throng of market volatility and ETH and stuff like that. So I feel like leverage is going to be a very tough sell. And that's where you're going to want a really solid DSR play, because the market will rotate from leverage into savings, basically. And I think it's basically motivating, finding ways to capture value into the DSR, generally speaking, is sort of what's top of mind for me, because I think, yeah, that gives people the motivation to be like, oh, fuck, yeah, I'm happy with a 1% wiggle room on a soft peg because I'm making 8% and I know it's going to be, you know, dye's not that volatile. You guys might have already talked about this, and I apologize again if you have.
No, I was going to say that, like, what you're kind of describing with leverage makes a lot of sense, but that's not what we saw last bull market.
No, it's exactly what we
saw.
saw.
No, we saw the demand for leverage increase last bull market. Like there was loads of dye around. We had to increase the stability fees by 20 or something.
No, but that wasn't the bull market. That was after 2017. So that was 2018.
Perhaps I'm misremembering. Perhaps it was.
No. I know what you mean. But if you look at BitMEX, right? BitMEX became BitMEX after 2017. You know, when people are trading in 2017, like if you've got Bitcoin, right? When you're a trader day to day, you make money on volatility. So if you've got volatility baked into the market, swinging 15, 20% every day, you're like, all right, I'll just strap myself in and play the market. But if nothing's happening, you've basically got to lever up as much as possible to pour petrol on the position. So a 5 BIP movement becomes, you know, a 5% movement. And so that's why we saw, because there was no volatility between the end of January 2018 and then sort of this zombieing crypto winter to sort of, you know, recent times, that's when BitMEX has become BitMEX for the most part. And that's also where I suppose Maker deployed, you know, Psi and Dai, and to a great success because there was demand for leverage in the market. But I feel like as that rotates, and these are good problems like that we have now, because, you know, you graduate to them, it feels like, because not everyone's fortunate enough to kind of get to this position, it seems like. So that's what I would imagine is going to happen. So all these people doing, like, you know, options trading and derivative, like, they're going to get crucified basically in the next like 12 to 18 months. So it's going to be who has the best security and savings position or play. In my opinion, that's a thought. You might be right, by the way, Lev. I need to check. So misinformation possible. I'll come back to you.
Sorry,
I think
I'm not sure what you're referring to, and about. I don't disagree with anything that you said.
so. At what point do we need to use? At what point will it become important that we can sort of maximize the yield on these assets, or are we sort of imagining that Maker is always going to be the lowest yield, or the sort of the lowest yield platform where you just go to get leverage sort of the riskier assets are left to
Well,
other protocols?
I think personally, this is where most people are going to have a lot of trouble because, everything is two-sided: supply and demand, volatile, not volatile. It's financial markets being cyclical, basically. So, you don't want to not have a play there per se. You've got to basically have an answer. Otherwise, the whole protocol becomes very lopsided. And then what that means basically over the bull run, or like over, let's say, the next 18 months, as the market starts grinding upwards, that you get to the other side of the market and you've survived, but the protocol's basically been lopsided the whole time. So it's been fighting to get people leverage, trying to find ways, and then that compromises, sorry, let me just pause for 1 second, and I apologize because I'm very bad at explaining things, but basically, if, let's say we want DAI generation, there's two ways we can go about it. One is give every person that has a crypto wallet the motivation to lock up an asset to generate DAI. And that can be, one, because I want to lever up. Two, because I know that the trade-off between DAI's soft peg, let's say, and floating between, let's say, 98 and $1.02, that is well worth the X% DSR. And so the DSR's success came from everybody generating yield because of a confident level and stability. Now, if there is no motivation and no DSR, so to speak, like no savings rate, what you get is this brute force attack approach where you're just piling on assets, which is not, and I'm not saying it's wrong, but it's one approach where you're thirsty as hell for leverage, or sorry, you're thirsty as hell for DAI generation. And the only way, because there's no answer to the DSR generating yield, so the only way is going to be more assets, bigger assets, more liquid, bigger market cap, yada, yada, yada. And then that ultimately is an early ripe, early rotten possible scenario where it looks good to start, but it's actually compromised the underlying like rock solid stability of, of DAI in a 2 year, 3 year time frame. Okay. That's my spiel. I'm sorry. Thanks.
So I think it's an interesting perspective because it's like if we think of these two different scenarios, right? A set of loans with a fixed interest rate will be relatively stable, will be like Maker can invest in them, it'll not change. I'm sorry, by Maker can invest in them, I mean that like sort of these drop tokens can be deposited in a vault, and can be used to collateralize and mint DAI. And so that is an opportunity for generating yield. And it'll be stable. It'll be maybe a bit harder to liquidate, or not as quick. Whereas if you have sort of this third party that provides capital to lever up with Maker, you're gonna have someone that has, like, and in my example, I said Maker wants an over collateralization of 110%. So I need to provide some of my own DAI, and I'm like 100% exposed to the spread I can make between the fixed drop yield and whatever the stability fee is in Maker. And so if then that stability fee becomes too volatile, it becomes very risky for me to provide to do this arbitrage, and therefore I will want to have a bigger arbitrage opportunity. So if Maker can sort of create guarantee relatively stable stability fees for the collateral, in this arbitrage opportunity, then of course, like it can still take a lion's share of the yield generated. But if it doesn't or doesn't want to, and it sees like an important part of sort of these real world assets in Maker being still that they can be like offloaded within a moment's notice, then like it'll be a very real scenario where like this third party will essentially see their vault liquidated because suddenly their stability fee spread has disappeared and their position is not worth saving anymore.
The only thing I'd consider with that is just similar to what you mentioned, which is like, is the arbitrage worth the effort? And the more arbitrage opportunity, the more I'm going to get out of bed in the morning, kind of, the more work I'll do. But if you think about sort of like looking at beyond, okay, so let's assume we want portfolio diversification for DAI, totally makes sense. Looking at a next factor being real world assets, a property, a building, it grows the float materially. Now, that is good from growing the float, but if it's at the cost of the underlying stability of the asset, then that obviously becomes problematic. Now, it might not be like that, but something like a building, so the bigger the float growth, typically it's going to be the more liquid the asset. So let's say we grow it by $1 billion and there's an apartment in Brooklyn, or maybe Brooklyn's really expensive. So yeah, it's $1 billion apartment in Brooklyn that is collateralized. Selling that is obviously going to be a process. Now, also the time horizon for that yield, because obviously yield on paper is different to the yield realized. So it's not really yield until it's completed a full cycle of collateralized, yield paid, yield realized to the person that was, into the protocol, let's say. So if, let's say it's 5 years time, the building gets liquidated because the property market crashes, that yield is like, this is a sort of, it's kind of kicking the can down the road a little bit, and the risk isn't predictable until then. And at the point when it does happen, it's too far down the track to undo, basically. I don't know if that makes sense.
So I think that, so like if you use a huge apartment building in New York, then as an example, then yeah, like that could be a very realistic scenario. I think the sort of the assets we're looking at right now are more short-term, like business loans, so like factoring, sort of like inventory finance, these kind of things, where the maturity is much shorter. So like you will go through you'll generate returns on the portfolio because you just turn over the portfolio over a given year. In a given year, maybe like, I don't know, 3 to 5 times, right? Like if you have 60-day invoices, then you turn over your portfolio 6 times each year. And so, of course, the way Maker works, like if you continuously kept growing the portfolio and you just like kept depositing more drop into it and taking more DAI and never ever repaying any of it, because you were never going to hit the debt ceiling, then that scenario that you mentioned could still happen. But I think the goal,
with the supply chain stuff, I totally agree, and I think that was a gap in my understanding. So thank you so much for clarifying it. I think it's just having that like gatekeeper effectively. So whether it, finding somebody that's in both worlds, basically. Because, the person that's taking supply chain, like invoice factoring, let's say I'm a Chinese seller selling on Amazon and we do invoice factoring, there might be a 3% fee they're going to pay for, instant settlement, let's say. And I'm going to be like, hey, this is great. They're going to pay me a 3% fee and I can collateralize that. But I'm a Maker community member, or, a very sort of like not regulated, because I feel like that word's got negative connotations in the context of this conversation, but a counterparty that can basically get hit over the head if they fuck up, for lack of a better term. Thanks for the explanations, made heaps of sense. And I'm sorry I've taken so much time of the conversation, but I really appreciate it. It's really, really constructive.
I think a few minutes ago you mentioned a concern about uncertainty in the stability fee affecting the borrower. My working assumption when we're talking about this kind of thing is that a borrower of this type would not be exposed to stability fee risk, either because the protocol, governance when adding this collateral type would actually lock in stability fees on some schedules. So, for example, they would either lock in for the duration of some project, or they would have some module that would be used to change the stability fee, which puts it on a 3-month time lock, or basically something that was appropriate for that kind of real world user.
Yeah.
Or the fund or whatever would just be hedging hedging it with base rate swaps or whatever. Just because given how volatile the base rate has been historically, it would not make sense for any borrower to ever be exposed to that unless they were actually using it for leverage on crypto. But I think both of those solutions that I mentioned are pretty realistic. So we should kind of work with the assumption that that will be in place, but also that this is kind of almost a hard requirement for this stuff to work.
Yeah, so it'd correspond to, like, if I've got an invoice that's got terms of net 30 or whatever it is, it's going to be corresponding to, I suppose, that's what you're saying, right? It's going to be a case by case or a category by category basis, obviously.
Yeah. I mean,
especially what I'm saying is that we now have this notion of base rate that was introduced formally last week by Sam. Thank you. Which is that now monetary policy discussion is mainly about changing this one number, and then all the stability fees are spreads on top of that. This number can get really high if the lending market really heats up, if we go back to 20% DXR kind of world. Obviously, if you have some wholesome supply chain factoring business that's been borrowing at 6% or something, that will completely wipe them out, and it wouldn't make sense for them to be exposed to that risk. So either maker needs to absorb that risk by basically offering fixed rate, fixed term stuff, or by having a time lock, or a secondary market for swaps where people are hedging this out.
Yep, that makes sense. Thanks.
Yeah, so I mean the secondary, like a market for swaps, I think is interesting, although I think not really present yet, not really present, and likely just adding another layer of complexity and cost, especially because you don't know where. I mean, either if you were able to just swap with the DSR, that would be relatively simple, but the base rate does not determine the DSR, right? There's still how the DSR is set can still be done independently, and so there's a spread between the base rate and the DSR, and as long as that varies, you couldn't even sell people fixed interest DAI in exchange for sort of stabilizing the stability fee of a certain collateral. So I think at a minimum, a time locked stability fee for a given asset type makes sense, as you're saying, Lev.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to necessarily dwell on the discussions of what the implementation for this should be. I think we can find a different place to discuss that. But in principle, I don't see an issue with the swap approach, because I mean, currently it's defined as your stability fee on this drop thing will be drop risk premium plus base rate. There's also been discussions about having different portions of the portfolio that have different base rates. But anyway, there will be some formal base plus spread definition of the of the stability fee for this collateral type, and you could just swap out the base part of it, and the risk premium, governance would have made some commitment that they're not going to, change the risk premium on you overnight.
Yeah. So
Sorry,
go ahead, Long. Yeah.
Go ahead. So the question with regards to like actual liquidations between the two like options you presented. In that, one of the maybe advantages of the second option is that you don't have like one monolithic vault that gets liquidated like all at once, right? Because that, as I understood, that was like the setup for the first option. Whereas with the second option, you have different, different users with different vaults, potentially with different collateralization ratios. So you would not necessarily get liquidations happening all in one chunk in the same way as you would with the first one. Or am I misunderstanding something?
That it could be how you would set it up. Yes. I mean, that would. You still couldn't. I mean, you couldn't enforce it, right? The same way you can't enforce it today. You can't keep Vitalik from dumping all of his ETH into a vault and minting all the DAI there is. But yeah, I think this in the second scenario, you would likely be able to have, and especially as these assets become available on other lending protocols, it would become probably it would become a more and more sort of distributed ecosystem where different people would want to, I guess, arbitrage at different risk thresholds and therefore different leverage. Yeah. So that could be an advantage. That's true. So like one thing that so like talking about liquidations, I think one thing that I like sort of documented as well in the forum thread is just sort of what Tinlake actually does with like looking at how the money flows, because like the drop token is a claim on DAI based on like from the repayments that come from a portfolio of loans. The TIN token is a claim on DAI from this portfolio of loans on anything that is above the value of or sort of anything that sort of is left when the drop token holders have been redeemed. So in any case, sort of the way Tinlake works is that investors can supply DAI and get drop or TIN, and then loans can be originated, and sort of at the end of that cycle, both drop and TIN investors can ask for, like, can sort of exchange or redeem drop and get their DAI plus interest, or they redeem their TIN and they get sort of the leftover residual profits. And so sort of what we want these portfolios to be what is like called a revolving pool. That means that they don't have a fixed timeline. They don't have a fixed size, but that these different interactions can happen independently. And so maybe I'll share my screen again. So sort of if you look at it from that way, you have like two ways that capital can come into this pool. It's like repayments and TIN and drop supply, meaning that new investors want to get issued these tokens. And so what we make sure on the contract side is that from these cash flows, of course, always drop token holders are redeemed first. So for, as an example, we have sort of what we call these epochs every 12 hours or a customizable amount of time. We collect this. You can go to smart contracts and put up your claim. So you can say, I want to supply or I want to redeem X amount of token. And then at the end of the epoch, this rebalancing is done. And if you, and so what we do is we take all of the money that comes in and we first give money to drop holders. If there's more drop holder, like if more drop holders want to be redeemed, then there's DAI available from the inflows. That means that everyone will get a pro rata share paid back, and the remaining, and they'll keep the remaining drop, and they can sort of go through this redemption cycle again in the next epoch. And sort of that, what that would mean is if there are, if there's no capital left and sort of all of the drop holders want out, that there would be no money left for the TIN token holders to get redeemed, and there would be no money left for new loan originations. So this would be the sort of worst case scenario where you're winding down this portfolio. So like drop holders just continuously want to get repaid whatever is coming in. And of course, this could be loan repayments, but it could also just be someone wanting to buy the drop token. And so if however, there's not, there's enough DAI in the system, liquid DAI in TINLake to redeem drop holders and redeem TIN holders, then at the end, for the next epoch, sort of whatever DAI is left over can be used to originate new loans. So from Maker's perspective, and for sort of from any like drop holders perspective, like what you're interested in is to see how these loan repayments are happening. Maybe if there's a lot of drop supply coming in, because if either one of those scenarios happens, right, then I have a realistic chance of getting my DAI back. In the long term, though, if you look at sort of like in the worst case scenario, sort of let's say there's a bank run, or like the general like drop holders like lose confidence in the portfolio of loans, there would be a constant, there would be constantly too much demand to redeem every single drop token holder that wants to get redeemed, which would mean as loan repayments are made, all of the drop token holders are paid back first, getting pro rata every epoch a DAI payment. When that and so if you look at a portfolio, say we have invoices that are due in general somewhere between 30 and 60 days, sort of your worst case scenario is that the average loan maturity is somewhere in the like 45-day range. So you'd look at it and you'd say, well, there's like I can probably get around 50% of my drop redeemed within the first 45 days, and the remaining or within the first 30 days, and the remaining I would get it over the second 30 days to like at the very end when sort of the last loan is supposed to get repaid, then I'd get my the final return. And so now for a keeper in the Maker system, so this is like the base, I think the base assumption of like what can I do with that drop token is I can use it to claim the cash flows of the loans as the least liquid or the sort of the slowest but sort of worst case scenario. Now, of course, you could also just sell the drop token, and then you're really just going to have to find someone who will buy it and give you the then it's your typical question of finding someone who's willing to wait until the drop token can be redeemed in case the pool is being wound down, and what kind of discount they want on the drop tokens for giving you the cash now.
Can I interrupt here? Sorry.
Yeah.
I'm kind of like thinking all this through, and like, why do we actually need keepers in this scenario, like at all?
I think it's a good question, because you could just say that.
Yeah, the maker protocol, like the adapter, or something, the flipper, I guess. Could it just like redeem, like wait 30 days and then redeem the DAI from?
I think that if that is, that is a way that it could happen.
I'm just thinking, because like in any auction, right, there's going to be some inefficiencies. So like, it's almost always going to end up worse than just waiting like 30 days. The only advantage is that we resolve the bad debt immediately.
Yeah. So you have the downside of doing that is that the system is under collateralized for a longer period of time.
For sure. Yeah.
So that is, but yeah, that is it. It would be a very simple thing to do on a technical level. The question is, do you want that under collateralization on your books as maker, or would you rather like try to sell it off to keepers?
The weird thing about the under collateralization though is that like people who are redeeming, like assuming like the worst case scenario is we like emergency shutdown while the system's under collateralized because of this, right? Like all like DAI holders we need to do is like wait 30 days for it to like for the value to like reaccrue, right? Like, is that correct? I mean,
that is, that's correct.
Right. You should probably mention that somewhere, just as like an option at the very least, because it wasn't immediately obvious to me that you could just do that. And,
I mean, another way would be, right, to not have a standard auction, but you could just say, like, MCD is willing to give you a basically the base rate, or like would basically be willing to give a keeper a discount to get the liquidity now, but if no one is willing to bid that high, then you're just going to use the typical redeem, and sort of you could almost have a floor for the auction.
Yeah, you can just express. Maybe Lev can say more things, because Lev's more left in the auctions. Like, what do you think, Lev? Might not be here.
I would actually phrase the point of it should be about risk, right? The reason that that the system liquidates things that go below the collateral requirement is to reduce risk. That's why it's preferable to just sort of waiting it out. But I think you have to be pragmatic and decide when for which assets and in which scenarios do you actually want to liquidate them. So like, in a lot of lending, you actually don't liquidate anything ever, because there's just not a reliable liquid market, and you essentially capitalize on that illiquidity by sitting on it. So that's part of what you get paid to do. So it's basically there. I don't think there's a single right answer here to it, but I think it's about risk basically, because the reason that we liquidate a ETH CDP when it gets risky is because
the price control
the system just doesn't want to be exposed to that. It's not like, we don't know whether it will recover or not, but we just can't tolerate the risk. So I think it's about risk versus how efficient do we think these auctions could possibly be.
Yeah. The fact that it's like a 30 or 60 day window, right? It's like, that's not a huge amount of time. Like, it's not nothing, but it's like, it's not very, very long time, right?
So I mean, I think it would be I keep forgetting the name of these different auction schemes, but it could be an auction where maker would say something like, we're starting the auction at this price. The price is based on the average, sort of doing a DCF, like this kind of cash flow calculation of looking at a keeper would have to wait on average 30 days for their cash. Therefore, we're willing to give you a discount of 10% AP, like 10% rate on those 30 days. Or you could, and then you could sort of like increase it, but sort of keep it relative to the amount of time that you need to look up your capital. But it would. There are, of course, also scenarios, right, where like you want to liquidate it, and a keeper might misprice the asset, might think it's worth your 100 DAI worth of drop are actually worth 100 DAI, but in the end, because there were above average defaults, you would only get back 80 DAI, and then by selling it to the keeper today, of course, like makers off better, but of course the keeper would be taking the loss. So it's a question of, yeah, like who does this, who decides this?
Yeah.
I guess by having an auction, you would having keepers auction, or having auctioning off this collateral and actually having keepers price it. Like in theory, right? We should get the best result, or at least have a market that determines this result.
Yeah, I mean, I think my main concern is like just the number of keepers there's going to be, just because of the whole, regulatedness, and the fact that,
yeah.
Specifically with the fact with like the first option, the fact that, well, not all the drop, but like the fact that you can get that the drop goes directly into the protocol, which directly provides DAI. That means there's not necessarily going to be that many people which borrow drop themselves. I mean, you mentioned there were a couple, right? Or a few, but the point is, like, if the maker protocol is like the primary source of liquidity, then there aren't necessarily going to be lots of other people investing in drop, maybe,
yeah.
or like so I worry that I would like reduce the keeper pools to the point where it just like might not happen like at all, right? And if there's two, like if there's a very small amount of like bidders, like keepers, then we've seen how that can end badly. So
yeah, I don't know, Lev, what do you think about
Well, for the bidders here, you have to imagine that they would be a pretty different profile to Maker in this kind of thing. So Maker is like looking for safe assets that it can charge a reasonable rate on, while I think that these keepers would be people who want to buy distressed assets at 80, 60, 40 cents on the dollar, which something that Maker doesn't want to hold because it seems to be risky, and they want to get something out of it. And these distressed asset buyers would have valued them and determined that they can make a very quick profit based on their analysis of the fundamentals of the situation and their ability to redeem them for something later.
The fact that it's already a portfolio makes me, well, again, perhaps incorrectly, makes me feel like 40 cents or 60 cents on the dollar is like super unlikely, right? Like, and if we did sell to like keepers at that like level, that would probably end up worse than like just keeping it. Like something really terrible would have to happen for like an entire portfolio of like invoice loans to like fail, right?
Yeah, I mean you have usually have like default rates that are less than 2% in like B2B payments worldwide. So yeah, like mispricing a portfolio by 40% like usually only happens when you have like systemic fraud,
right?
Which of course we can't rule out.
Sure.
Best though.
It's interesting. Yeah, I'd encourage you to like sort of kind of discuss the keeper things more, like in some of your posts, because again, like I think most of governance are kind of used to thinking of liquidations as like keepers as like there's this auction, this is always what happens, and this is like very different and has like very different requirements potentially, well not different requirements, but like it has different statistics, I guess, different policies. Yeah, it's cool though.
Cool. I think we're sort of running, at least on my end. I have another meeting soon, so we're running out of time. But so for me, like takeaways are, I will definitely fix the numbers in, and I think luckily Discourse lets me edit my forum post. So I'll just update it and sort of explain a bit more, and yeah, add a little bit about what like Maker can do with the drop if it wanted to liquidate it, i.e. turn it into DAI, or also like what the sort of the scenario would be for keepers. So.
Yeah, sounds
Cool.
good.
Okay, well then, thanks everyone for coming, and we'll keep posting on the forums about the sort of results and progress.
Thanks so much, guys. This was awesome. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for joining, Mike.
Yeah, same. It was good.
Hey.
Thanks.
Bye, guys.
Have a good one.